first of all, how do you find like A players? Like, how do you find talent? And then I want to go into like, how do you actually retain them as well?
Today in business, one of the questions I get asked the most is how do you find, recruit, and retain A talent? Well, that is probably the hardest part of my job too. You know, the job of a CEO or any head of any company, the owner, is recruiting, retaining talent, and then making sure the culture's enforced. So for me, what I found is I was an old salesman. That's what I did. My first job was a salesman. So I look at it like a sales funnel. I want to have my biggest possible funnel and then have a process for weeding out the people who don't fit in what my culture is. And so what my encouragement is you go to as many sources as possible. A caveat, watch what your return on your investment is for those sources, because you can spend a lot of money on LinkedIn and the other, Glassdoor, the other job websites, Monster.com, all those things. They do charge you for that. So you have a big funnel. You got to make sure you're tracking if you're actually getting enough candidates to make it worthwhile. And once you do that, you want to expand that funnel. The best talent I've found comes from word of mouth. So we offer very sizable signing bonuses for team members who recruit other team members. So we've increased for attorneys and managers. I think it's $5,000 or $10,000. I'm using executive recruiters, so that's actually a reasonable amount. If I can avoid paying an executive recruiter $25,000 and pay one of my team members $10,000, that's a great deal. I would go up to $25,000. If we had difficulty recruiting. So number one, your culture fits. It's going to be your A players at your organization. They will know other A players. So that's the first place I would start. And incentivize it, because those A players are going to be the real bread and butter and the backbone of your business. So have a large hiring funnel, have a very detailed system process for weeding out candidates. The other big mistake that you may make, particularly when you're hiring your first round of staff, is you will hire people who remind you of you. And that is a terrible mistake to make. If you're an entrepreneur or a business owner, you do not want more of you in your organization. And typically, if you're an entrepreneur, you're probably an extrovert and maybe an eye on the disc profile. So you want everybody to like you. You want to like everybody. And that's really an awful way to build your business, because the talents and skills you need to build your business are not your talents and skills. You've got to hire people who are better than you in areas that you're not good at. And so you want to make sure you have an intentional description. You want to focus on the talents you want, and then you need to look for somebody who matches those talents, not somebody who, hey, I like this person. I want to have dinner with them. I don't mind going out with them. That's going to be your hiring barometer, and you will fail with that. We have failed with that. I can tell you the people who I hired, who I didn't really think I was going to get along with, have turned out to be my star players. And a lot of the people I hired on a gut because I liked them, that didn't last more than 3 or 4 months, because they were very good at, mirroring my personality back to me, but when it came time to deliver, they did not deliver on the job. And then it seemed like I had to fire my friend, which was not an uncomfortable conversation to have. So I encourage you, identify what you're looking for, keep your funnel wide open, have a process to weed them out, but don't look for people who remind you of you, unless you're trying to replace yourself. Look for people who can do the job, and make sure you have a job description to find out what those criteria are, so you have an objective way to verify that they're going to be able to do the job.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. And it's like actionable advice. It's like, don't hire people who look like you, because you're just going to hire yourself, and you don't need more of yourself in the business. I do want to pivot more into like faith and religion and how that's played a role in your business, because I feel like we'll go down some great questions there. The first one is, have you always been someone who's practiced faith? And if not, like, how did you kind of come about, faith just in your own personal life?
Ever since I was a little kid, I had a sense of faith. When I was a little kid, I had a feeling that there was a God and he had a plan for me, but I wouldn't say I had a particularly strong, organized, religious kind of faith. What brought me to the faith I have today, and what I keep talking about, particularly in business, is the faith that came about in response to really catastrophic life failure in my life. I had done well in law school, and I had, if you checked a lot of boxes and looked at my resume, it looked pretty good, but I was failing financially, I was failing in relationships, and my businesses were failing too. And at that moment, when I was sleeping on a couch and was a couple $100,000 in debt, I had an encounter with God that I can't explain except to say that it was supernatural. And in that moment, my life changed. And I am what you call a born-again Christian because of that experience, because I realized that Jesus was the person who I was not in relationship with. So my religion became, and my faith became very personal in that moment. And all I can tell you is, and I speak to all the business people out there who want all the business and tactics and strategies to grow, yeah, there's tactics out there. But if you don't have a spiritual foundation, you will fail in business. You see it happen all the time with musicians and rock stars and athletes. They get tremendous success, but they have not built a spiritual foundation. And the amount of strength you have to be successful in business, to handle 10, 20, 30, 50, $100 million in revenue and income, the spiritual strength you need to have is tremendous. You know, I had big problems. What I thought was when I was sleeping on the couch and I had no money, a couple $100,000 in debt. I can tell you today, I deal with much bigger problems on a daily basis. And it would be very easy for me to turn to a bottle of alcohol or to do one of the other vices, drugs or anything else, and get me off track. Without spiritual strength, eventually you will fail. And you will find yourself going down a path of vices, or your family will just reject you. There's a lot of very wealthy business people, whose children cannot stand them. And if you have all the money in the world, but you don't have your kids' love, it's not worth it, not one bit. And so I encourage everybody earlier to get more serious about spirituality so they can lay the proper foundation. So when the money comes, they can handle it and they know what to do with it, instead of buying a Lamborghini or a fancy yacht or something like that. Those things are not going to fulfill you.
The Rolex. Yeah.
The Rolex, right. The Rolex. I wear an Apple Watch now. I think I have an Apple Watch on now. You know, yeah. I sold my Lamborghini because it was only attracting unnecessary attention, unwanted attention. You know, when I decided to sell my Lamborghinis, I pulled up, I live in what they call a condo-tel, and it's a condo and a hotel. I had a Lamborghini one time, and I pulled in, and 3 women in bathing suits ran out and started taking pictures around my car. I didn't know who these women were, and the valets for the condo were there, and they saw these women all climbing all over my car, which really upset me. I wanted them to get the women off my car. And I said, you know what? These guys probably think these are my girlfriends, and I'm a married man with kids. This is unnecessary attention. The desire to drive this car is not nearly as much as to avoid any complications from that kind of drama. And so I sold the Lamborghini that weekend. I said, I'm done with this. And I never had another fancy sports car since then. I don't need it. Once you can have it, you don't really want it anymore anyway. But the truth is that's unnecessary attention. But if I didn't have a spiritual foundation, my ego would have probably gotten involved and been like, hey ladies, how you doing? I got out of my car, I went inside, I told the valet manager, get the women off my car, get the thing parked, you know, they're going to make it dirty, whatever it was, and I sold it that weekend. And you may laugh, but it's the truth. To maintain yourself on the right spiritual path, those are the kind of decisions you've got to make.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. These are all great stories, but how do you involve like faith in your business, like and make it like part of your culture and things like that?
It's a little tricky to make faith, particularly Christian faith or any religious faith, part of your culture in the sense that you don't want to offend anybody who isn't of that faith. And so whenever I'm talking about issues that are faith-based, I usually say, look, you don't have to believe what I believe to be successful here. And that's true. Not every single person who works for me is Christian. I have a lot of Jewish people. I have some Muslim people. I have people who are atheists. It's all okay. If you're a good person and you believe in our cultural values, then you'll be able to prosper here. I believe personally, for me to get to the maximum level that God has for me, I have to follow this particular faith. But that said, the truth is, I've studied, as I said, over 1,000 self-help books. At base, every one of those books can be found in the Bible. Every single one. In fact, the vast majority of what most motivational speakers say is biblically based. And so all I do is I take the biblical truths that I know are there, and I repackage them for the masses. And the truth is, as I say, if you go into a Tony Robbins seminar right now, and I like Tony Robbins, I'm not outing him, most of what he says is biblical. Most, if not all. And as he talks, I'm thinking, that's this Bible verse, that's this Bible verse, that's this Bible verse. And so it's nice to remember that and those lessons. But the truth is that most of what is successful is biblically based. And so I basically my wife and I are both Christians. We put God at the center of the firm. We want to do things that are pleasing to God. We don't tell everybody else they have to do that. But at the same time, the values and the culture are based around biblical principles, which are true principles, right? There's nothing that's in the Bible that I think is going to lead you wrong, at least in business. Now, we can split hairs over, the Old Testament stuff that isn't really applicable to business nowadays, sure. But most of what I'm talking about in Psalms and Proverbs and a lot of the biblical stories, those are all business stories too, and it's applicable in your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really powerful. And like you said, I agree that like a lot of the motivational speakers out there are taking principles from the Bible.
Well, they may not even know they're from the Bible. They know a principle. They see it. They see an application, and they label it. They don't even know it comes from the Bible. So if they're atheists, they're not going to know it's from the Bible. One of the big examples of this was Napoleon Hill. Right? Napoleon Hill was actually the son of a Baptist minister, as I recall. And he was a very religious person. And yet his book, Think and Grow Rich, one of the best self-help business books of all time, it's biblically based. And he was a Christian, and he was the son of a minister, but when he wrote the book, he wanted to have a broader appeal, so he didn't make it as hyper-religious as he could have. There's principles in there. Instead of saying God, he talked about the universe, and instead of saying, spiritual power, he talked about energy and things like that. So, it's there, and sometimes there are spiritual principles that are repackaged as, mainstream secular principles, but they're still biblical, and the speaker may actually be biblical. You just don't, or religious, but you just don't know it because they're trying to reach as many people and help as many people as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you just talk about how like having a religious like mindset helps you get through challenges? Like I know a lot of people are like, they wake up and they like, if there is a challenge, like they see it as just like a test from God, for example, and how that mindset has gotten you over like difficult things.
Having a religious foundation and a knowledge of the Bible can really help you as a business person overcome a lot of the tragedies or obstacles that are there. The Bible is full of stories about how God had helped people overcome limiting circumstances or challenges or threats or other things around them. And if you have an understanding of the Bible and you believe in the Bible and you believe that God has his hand on your life and has a plan for you, you can take the stories of the Bible and you can mirror them and learn the lessons from them when you're confronted with challenges of your own. David versus Goliath, right? People look at the David versus Goliath story. It's a young shepherd boy against a professionally trained giant of a man, and David was able to overcome him through faith. There's other pieces of David versus Goliath, though, that most people don't realize. That I always like to tease people about this story. The first question that David asked, or the first statement that David said when he was confronted with Goliath, was not, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that dares mock the army of the living God?" No, the first thing that David said is, "What are they going to pay me if I take on that guy?" First question David asked, what will be added unto the person who removes a stain, right, from Israel? And he asked it twice. David would not have fought Goliath if he wasn't going to get paid for fighting Goliath. So when people are like, "Oh, you don't need to get paid and you got to do this." No. You get paid for your work. You do. And David got paid, and he was concerned about it. He asked it twice. So that's something, when you overly religious stuff. But David is an inspiring story. He's an inspiring character because he was such a flawed human being, but he was able to do so many great things in the Bible. And there's great examples of this. Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. In the New Testament, of course, you look at the Apostle Paul, who was really flawed as a Pharisee who was persecuting Christians and then converted to Christianity and wrote most of the Bible and did great things. So, there's always a story there to inspire you, but you've got to believe in the promises of the Bible that they're for you. And that's the most important thing of religion is, to be reminded of the promises. A lot of people, when I talk to them about my role of faith in my business and religion in my life, and, a lot of folks who've never had a real encounter with God, they get upset and they say, "Oh, the Bible is a bunch of what you can't do and what you shouldn't do and all that." And I agree with you that if you read it from one perspective, yes, it is. But I look at the Bible differently than most people. I look at the Bible as a book of what I can do. You see, I look at the Bible as a book of rules, but rules are really the kind of rules that define the game. For example, look at the difference between football and soccer, or for my European friends, football and football, right? There's rules that differentiate the game of soccer from football. And similarly, there's rules to differentiate a good life from a bad life in the Bible. So the rules aren't things like, oh, you can't do that in a condemnation standpoint or from a condemnation standpoint. The rules are, this is how you reach your best life by following these rules, right? You can say they're rules. I don't think as Americans, we don't like rules. I don't like people to tell me what to do. We're all, don't tread on me, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is this is more of an operations manual, an owner's manual for the human body and the human mind. And if you look at the book, the Bible as a book on how to best reach your potential, it's not what you have to do, it's what you get to do. That's a way to reframe it, and you begin to unlock the real mystery of the Bible, which is the promises that God made to us for our best life, using and relying on His Word and His principles in relationship with Him. He really wants us to come back to a relationship with Him, but these principles really take root when you get an understanding that it's what you should want to do for your life, not what you have to do or you can't do or you shouldn't do and all those things. And when you get past that, there's a whole new relationship that can be unlocked for you.
Yeah. You're thinking like, hey, this is what, I want to do this so I can, reach my full potential. And I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, no one talks to a sports star and says, you have to go to the gym. Like, they know they got to go to the gym. So no sports stars say, I don't want to go to the gym, right? I mean, it's just what they do. They have to do that. And similarly with the Bible, you say, well, you should, don't yoke yourself unequally, or put God first, or don't sleep around. Those are all principles that it's the same thing as a rule for a professional athlete. Don't move across the line of scrimmage before the ball snapped, right? It just, for them it makes sense because that's the nature of what they do. For us as human beings, I think we're a little rebellious, so we don't want to, follow this. It's a rule, I don't want to follow it. But the truth is, it really defines the game of life for us and how to best play the game of life.
Yeah, no, that's a really good perspective. I feel like that I haven't heard it articulated like that before, but I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure people will get a lot of value out of hearing it.
Especially my engineer friends. I talk to engineers. Engineers are like, oh, just a book of what you can't do. I'm like, well, let me walk you through that. And by the way, I can break down the book of Genesis, the first two chapters of the book of Genesis, and show you how there's systems and processes created that are like businesses, and you can see that. I have a whole speech on this. So anyway, but engineers are the ones, that comment right there is where engineers are always and computer programmers are oh wow, I never thought of it that way. It's it's your manual for writing software. Yes, it is.
Well, yeah. I feel like, when you put things in just metaphors, it's just a lot easier for people to understand and comprehend. So. Yeah.
Well, and, Jesus taught in parables. That's why, right? Because the people who have the understanding can get to the bottom of the parable. Instead of being confronted with, you must do this, Jesus, says, the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he gives a parable. The people who are really enlightened will understand the implication of the parable and say, oh, I see that, right? There's different kinds of seed that are scattered on the road. But if you said, you go out there and you're going to preach, you're going to be 4 groups of people, they don't want to hear that, but they say there's some, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this. Then they try, their brain goes to work on figuring out how to apply it. It's sugarcoating it, I guess.